Thanks. Nice to see you guys. I'm a consultant, and I've been in this business for a really long time, doing all kinds of stuff. And in the last couple of years, I've been designing smart city strategies for large cities. Most recently for Greater Amman Municipality in Jordan. I also did one for a city in the Philippines that's not yet public. And shortly I'm going to Turkey, where we'll be working with the major cities on platforms. So I come from the telecom sector and the digital sector, and I know how we as a community think about this business. I've also worked quite a lot with a very large civil engineering company. Now, stop to think about it for a second. When you're building cities, it's not really about data centers and connectivity and all that. It's about running municipal governments. It's about providing services to people. And the civil engineers and the urban planners and what we call the AEC, architectural engineering construction world, is a very different dynamic than ours. So the politics are different, their priorities are different, and they don't know anything about digital. So I see that there's like this split between what our community hopes and expects from a digital city and what actual city planners are doing. And it's almost like an 80-20 rule. Now, in our world, we like data that's machine readable, that's replicable, that's scalable, can be put into a data center, turned into an application, and monetized as some sort of a service. That's what we do. But in fact, urban planners are thinking in a very different way, and they have different types of data that's important to them. The structural integrity of buildings, the safety of communities, the cost of running things. So there's this, the 20% is the really hard part that is the urban planner's job, or the civil engineer's job, the transportation planner's job, versus how the digital world is trying to get involved in smart city planning. So this is like a cultural gap, right? People do not speak the same language. They don't understand each other in the same ways. The other really big gap is that there's a huge difference between the first tier cities and everybody else. So if you're in New York, Tokyo, Singapore, London, and another 25 cities, the types of problems and the types of challenges and the types of opportunities from a digital perspective are very different than if you're in, say, Tunis or Davao or whatever. Very, very different. So when we hear the hype or the vision, let's not even call it hype, that sounds like a bad word. We talk about the vision of a smart city. A lot of times people are projecting it to the very highest level, the most extreme cases of things like autonomous vehicles or virtualized urban experiences. Most cities in the world are not thinking in that way. And if you're in this room already, you probably understand that urbanization is happening worldwide. So people are pouring in the cities. And most of those cities where the people are moving in are not actually equipped with a framework for what we're calling digital transformation. So where are the opportunities? From what I've seen. I don't have a presentation today. I was asked to do this 2 days ago. But I do have a fancy presentation, the keynote, on Tuesday. So if you want to see that. Where's the money going? There are a lot of trials these days. And if you read in the trade press, you hear about smart waste disposal systems or making bus routes smarter. But really, what is a smart city? I mean, there is no definition, and it depends on where you are. So on the one hand, you have the basic operation of the municipal government. And if you think in terms of enterprise architecture, any large organization has to fix the way it manages its own operations. So some of the things you might not think of as smart city, some people do, like a disaster recovery data center, like open data, like applications integration, like cybersecurity platforms, things that are just done to keep the lights on. And this is actually the biggest source of investment right now. This is where people are focusing. But I would say there are probably 5 other areas that matter. For the PTC community, obviously access. The communications component of a smart city has a lot of different forms, but you have to enable your people. So remember, cities almost never actually own their communications networks, right? They are encouraging, they're cheerleading, they're trying to get people to make investments. But you have to have municipal Wi-Fi, you need municipal fiber networks, you need to build out access to the underserved. So you have to have access before you can talk about these other things. But what are the other things that are pushing it? As I said, the enterprise architecture and the back-end modernization. Second, transportation. Because with all the people moving to the cities, you have real problems with traffic. So there are a number of different types of systems. In fact, this is what was happening in Amman, in Jordan, of looking at how to manage that flow of traffic. So there's a whole school of people who just do just that. Second is energy consumption. So smart lighting lowers the cost of a city's operations tremendously when you move into LEDs. You also are in the smart grid. It's actually a bigger impact on energy consumption, but typically speaking, there's a public utility that's different from the city. They're not the same people. And they're thinking about different types of revenue equations. The smart lighting becomes very interesting in the new digital world with 5G, because if you're changing the light poles to put on new lights, you might also be putting on a transponder or a radio, integrated sensors, and all of a sudden, what was simply a light becomes a platform for communications and cameras, data analytics, video analytics. Third, public safety is a huge topic, and again, it depends on the city and where you're going. Sometimes it's done by the city, sometimes it's done by the police, and it can be as simple as having cameras in central locations to track things, but it also can mean data and video analytics to track people. There's different models in the world of how this is unfolding. Well, so much for the facial recognition is on the screen, so I can't see me from here, so I can't look at my notes. But, so going energy, transportation, back-end systems, and then common platforms for things like digital ID and cybersecurity. Now, there's still a lot of talk about these future platforms, like, for instance, autonomous vehicles. And if you're in New York or Tokyo, it really does matter. But a second-tier city, these things are so far over the horizon that it's hard to even think about. Another very large concept that comes up at the level of urban planning is sustainability. So this is not a typical digital concept, but how can these new systems, the IoT applications that are being invented, the shared services that are being invented, do things like monitor carbon capture or energy reduction in smart buildings, and think back. What I want to come to as a very quick conclusion is there are two different worlds here. We have what we as an industry are bringing to and pushing on cities, and then it's the reality of what cities want and need. So at the leading edge, they're willing to experiment by changing business models and changing the way municipalities operate. But that's really a pretty difficult proposition, because you have to get people to think in digital terms in order to transform what they're doing. So lightning talk, very quick. I think I've got maybe 2 minutes. Anyone wants to chat? Any comments, thoughts, your own ideas, perspectives, what you're working on? What brought you here to this room?
I've got a quick question about ethics of smart cities. What do you think about, like, a lot of things we can do doesn't mean that we're necessarily seriously doing it. So what are your thoughts on that?
So the question is, what are my thoughts about we can do a lot of things, but maybe we shouldn't do some of them. And frankly, I'm going to be addressing this on Tuesday, and in that session, keynote session. But it's really, it's possible to create a surveillance economy and a surveillance state, and it's happening worldwide. And the tools are here. They're in hand. They're getting very powerful. They're easy to deploy. They're not very expensive. And it comes down to what kind of society do you want to create? So sometimes people say, well, the whole point of a smart city is not about digitalization, it's about improving people's lifestyles. Make them safe, lower the cost, make your life more convenient. And you have to ask, are you willing to live in a place where you're under constant surveillance? And as we know, in certain parts of the world, that's okay. And in other places, it's a question mark. So I know where I come out, and I'm also a little bit careful about the kind of recommendations that I put before governments, because I typically work with the mayor or the CIO as they're designing these architectures. And the question is, so what are you building, and for what purpose? So that's it. I'm done. Thanks a lot.